All right, YouTubers, I'm doing suspension work again on this '06 Chevy Silverado 1500. This is the last year of the first gen of the Vortec, and this is a 5.3 liter V8. The VIN is T. It's a rear wheel drive model, and I wanted to make one video that would give you an overview of your nut sizes and your torque settings to simplify this so you can go in prepared for this job. So I'm going to start by looking at the back side of the knuckle, and I want to give you the fittings and work my way out as best as I can so you can see what you're going to need. So let's start on the back side here. The 3 bolts, there are 3 bolts here, and those bolts go through the knuckle. They feed the hub and ultimately through the brake dust shield here, and there's 3 of them, and those 3 bolts are 15 millimeter, and by removing those 3 bolts, essentially you're going to release your hub and all this whole front section. Now let me show you the back side of that. Here's the back side. You can see coming from the back side, there is the rotor, there is that brake dust shield, and there's those 3 holes that those 3 bolts go into that feed. There's your ABS sensor wire. Now let me show you what those bolts look like. This is the bolts. There's 3 of them. All right, so let's go back and look again at those 3. So I've basically taken my outer tie arm off so that you can see them, the 3. All right, now when you put those back, you're going to need to torque those to 133 foot-pounds, those 3. So it's quite a lot of force there. All right, moving from there, the upper and lower ball joints. This upper ball joint, that's an 18 millimeter to remove that on the upper. On the bottom, way under the bottom here, it's 24 millimeter. And when you go back to torque these, the upper is 37 foot-pounds. The lower is 81 foot-pounds. So considerably more on that bottom lower ball joint. Okay. Now let's move over to the tie rods. You have an inner and an outer. This inner jam nut here, or this inner tie rod, is torqued. The inner tie rod up there is torqued at 75 foot-pounds. This outer tie rod is at 48 foot-pounds. This jam nut is a 7/8 or 23 millimeter, and the tie rod castle nut, or you may have a plain nut, either one, is basically an 18 millimeter. Okay. Now let's talk about the control arms. You have a lower control arm, and we have the upper control arm here. All right, so let's start on the upper control arm. In the upper control arm, look back here. You have your camber kit installed, but you see that bolt and the nut on the end that goes into that upper. Those are 23 millimeters on both sides. 23 millimeters or a 7/8 SAE. So, and those are torqued at 140 foot-pounds. Okay, now your lower control arm. Back on the lower, you see your nut on this, on one side, you see the bolt, and you see the nut on one side. On this side is an 18 millimeter, and this larger nut locking type is 24 millimeters. And those get torqued at 129 foot-pounds. Okay, so you have a bolt on this side and a bolt on this side. Notice the orientation of them. Same thing up on your upper arms. Okay, now working through the suspension. Let's talk about this front shock here. All right, on mine at the top there are two, right there, two nuts at the very top. That upper, both of them are 14 millimeters, and that torque setting is 15 foot-pounds. Now, if you follow the shock down underneath the lower control arm, underneath there are two bolts that go in there, and they are 13 millimeters, and that torque setting is 59 foot-pounds underneath there. Okay, what you don't see here is the sway link, the end link, the sway bar link. It's been removed, but I'm going to reinstall a new one. And those end nuts, there's one on top, one on the bottom, is a 14 millimeter and a 17 millimeter. And they're torqued at 17 foot-pounds. Now, I'm going to swing around. If you decide you're going to do the sway bar bushings, those brackets that hold that bushing in place is torqued at 37 foot-pounds. And the nuts are 10 millimeter that fit up in that. Okay. Now, let's go over and look at the caliper on the other side. All right, now I have the caliper and the brakes hanging on a tie back there to support the brake hose. I don't want to damage it. Now those caliper, the bracket to the knuckle is 129 foot-pounds. And the the front caliper bracket, that's that bracket, that's the bracket in the back side, the bracket that's the caliper is attached to is 139 foot-pounds. Now the rear caliper slide bolts, I'm sorry, the front caliper slide bolts are 80 foot-pounds. These are the slide bolts. Okay, I think that I have covered everything now. Let's just double check. So we did the upper and we've done the lower. So, and we've done your torque settings. So I believe we've covered everything. If not, I'll stitch it back together. But I believe that covers everything. So now you'll know your tools that are going to be needed for your suspension work. You'll also know your torque settings. Now I did not give you like a torque setting on this 10 millimeter that attaches the brake hose. It's probably 7 foot-pounds. It's not, it's going to be minimum. So I didn't include that. But otherwise this should be helpful. Again, this is a Chevy 1500 V8. Hopefully this is helpful.